I know what this looks like. Maybe a little Kentucky backhand action. Hey everybody, Christmas is coming up, so I gotta make a few presents. And it's about this time of the year that I'll usually bust out a couple tools for what I like to call redneck wood turning. Now, simple presents you can make are like these little cork stuffers for like wine bottles or liquor bottles. They're nice and easy to make. You can get these done easily in just like an hour at a time. And then on the more advanced end, like here's this phallic object I made a few years ago. It is actually the handle to a trowel that broke, so I'm gonna be installing a new blade on it, but whatever, that's for a different time. But then there's also like this mallet that I've been using in the shop for a couple of years out of some spalted maple. So this is kind of on the bigger end of things I'd feel comfortable turning with this method, but little things like those cork stuffers or like a handle to these little bottle openers you can buy. Those are super easy and simple to make, and I'm going to show you today how I do it. Now, if you just have a chunk of wood sitting around, then sure, you can make yourself a mallet, but probably for most presents, you're going to buy some of these kits. Rockler just had their like Black Friday or Cyber Monday or whatever special, so I bought some. All of these basically, you just got to turn a little handle for and it makes something, and we are going to need a couple tools. Most importantly, drill press. You can do at least like the cork stuffer with just a handheld drill, but drill press makes this way easier. And then I rely heavily on an angle grinder. We're going to make some little brackets, kind of like this one right here, which we'll go over shortly. And then just random things like random sandpaper. I like these little foam back discs you can pick up so you can reuse your old sanding discs. And then some kind of finish is nice, gives it a nice finished look. I like this wood turner's finish for like stuff you might eat from or put in your mouth. And if it's like a garden trowel, then I rely on the old Armor Seal. I really like General Finishes. I like their stuff, but honestly, you can use anything that you're comfortable with. All right, quick caveat here. All of these kits, this one is actually designed just for epoxy, but a lot of these, if you look at it, they come with this like threaded insert you're supposed to put into the wood, and then you can screw this stem in there. They say you can remove the head if you want to wash this thing. But for me, like none of these objects are just like sitting in like raw meat or anything. So I actually, even though, at this point I can still unscrew these because I've actually cut a thread into this wood hole here, I will eventually just epoxy all of these as kind of the last step. I find if you're going to have any like problems with bacteria with these, it's going to basically grow right in this little seam if you're able to like wick water in there. So for me, I'd rather just like epoxy this closed, make sure there's no room for any bacteria in there, and I think it's just more trouble-free. But those stems are pretty critical to this process. Let's get started. Now, projects like this I think are a great time to just burn up random scraps. For this first little cork stuff I'm going to be showing, I actually glued 2 pieces of scrap together. I think it gives kind of a more interesting look. But honestly, any small scraps of like roughly this size will work great. Once you have a wood chunk that you'd like to use for your cork stuffer, I think you can save a bunch of time by using a hole saw. I choose a size that is basically as wide as the block of wood. And when you're working on the drill press, I think an old school wood screw clamp is a nice way to kind of hold the piece of wood, but not get your fingers too close to the sharp spinny bits. So with the hole saw chucked up, I make one shallow little cut into the wood chunk to establish the center point, and then I remove the pilot bit. Now marking the center point is pretty important, even though pulling the pilot bit can be a little annoying. With the pilot bit out, I then plunge the hole saw as far in as it will go, and then using a screwdriver, I snap off the little leftover chunks around the outside. Now, if you remember, all those kits had little metal stems, so we're gonna end up actually drilling out that center hole that we marked with the pilot bit and then tapping it to fit the same thread size. Once the threads are cut, I'll test fit whatever thing I'm making, and then I'll mark with the pencil all the way around it. We'll use this as a guide for how much material we need to remove once we start trying to shape this thing. Then back at the drill press, I'll just find a random bolt with the same size thread, cut the head off, and then chuck it up into the drill press to actually act kind of like the spindle that this thing is going to spin on. And voila, we have a little spinny thing, and now we can shape it. The first phase is the angle grinder, and after I get the general shape that I like, I'll switch to various sandpaper grits. Since you are sanding against the grain as the object is spinning, if you have some scratch marks that you just can't get out, eventually you may have to just stop the drill and then hand sand with the grain in little spots. But usually I can get it looking pretty good with these small little cork stuffers, just sanding it as it spins. And once you're happy with the way it looks, you just got to use a little bit of finish on it. I also like to do this with the object spinning. I have this maybe placebo effect that I think it drives the finish a little better into the grain. And there you go, a finished cork stuffer. Okay, it's the next morning now. There's the 5 little cork stuffers made yesterday. And now these little scraps I glued together I think are dry enough to proceed. So we're gonna move on to making some slightly bigger handles. So bigger handles are the same process, I would say, ish. The biggest difference I would say is that you need support on the other end of the handle, as it is just such a long object that there's too much leverage out at the far end of it. Now you can buy little kits for this. I actually bought one when I first decided to do this on my drill press, and this little thing is designed to kind of bolt into your top here, and then it has this center pin. This bearing though is not designed for thrust loads, so it is basically chunked out at this point, and when I actually go to like put a piece of wood on it, the friction of the bearing essentially means the wood is spinning and the metal stays still because this thing is just so chunked out. I looked for getting a bearing that would fit this that was actually designed for thrust loads, and it cost more than the whole kit, so I've just sort of abandoned that. So as a replacement, I'm going to just show you how to make this out of just a scrap piece of wood and a bolt, and that works just as well as this seized up one that costs money. So I find a fairly large bolt, chuck it up in the drill press, and then cut the head off, and then shape it into a point. Just as simple as that. Then I find a scrap of wood, and I hammer our new little pointy piece of metal into it. And then I screw that block into one of these sacrificial inserts for my drill press surface. Your method of attaching the pointy metal bit to your surface may vary depending on your setup. So now that we're ready to actually do some wood turning, the hole saw trick doesn't work too well on this because the object is just so much longer than the depth of the hole saw. So I just mark a center point on each end of my wood block. One end gets the threaded hole like the cork stuffer, and on the other side I just cut a little dimple with a countersink so that can register into that bottom. And then it's an angle grinder party. I will say though, at the start here when it's a square profile on that wood chunk, I find it helps to just like crudely cut off the corners with a piece stop. Then I'll start up the drill press, take a pencil to mark the high spots, stop it, cut those corners off, and I'll do this a few rounds till it's fairly close to being round. I find trying to just go straight to the angle grinder with these hard square corners is just kind of a violent process, and I don't think it works so well. But once it is fairly close to round, then I just try to find my inner patience, and I think using light pressure with the angle grinder is just better for shaping this thing than really trying to dig in. I find it can lead to some kind of weird oscillating effects if you just try to get a little too hasty with the angle grinder here. But once I'm happy with the general shape, then it's the same process, just some sandpaper, getting it nice and smooth. And since this object is longer, I find that sanding with the grain does help to produce kind of a nicer finished surface. So I will usually stop the drill press, and then while making jokes about buffing the wood, get it nice and smooth. And that's it. All right, so that's what the finished product looks like. I still gotta glue this in. And it's got that little dimple on the back, but that never bothers me the way that looks from having that little countersunk hole there to kind of help center it. And yeah, I think I've got a few more of these to batch out. That's how that other handle turned out. And then that's how all those knobs. I got a few more handles, a couple more things I need to make that are going to require epoxy. So I think, most of us can figure out how to mix up a little epoxy, get some in the hole on the surface, and then thread in the metal parts. So I'm not going to cover that in the video, but hopefully you found that interesting. I really like the tactile feel of these wooden handles, especially if you can get a hardwood that's like fairly dense. I think it just feels nice and weighted. I'd like to eventually maybe make myself some screwdrivers actually like this if I could find some screwdriver blanks, but that's a project for the future. Anyways, I hope you found that useful and hopefully something you can make in your shop. Thanks so much for watching, guys.